Hey, it's good to see you again. We have finally completed our journey through the leadership acronym, all 10 letters. And now I'm going to present to you the greatest example of leadership ever to touch this earth. And that example is in Jesus Christ. We're going to walk through all 10 letters, and I'm going to share with you a little bit of the scripture as to how he demonstrated each one of those letters. The first one we're going to start with is the L, which is loyalty, being committed to something outside of oneself. When we turn into the scriptures to Luke 22 and 42, we see where Jesus is toiling with himself over the decision of moving forth with giving his life for the salvation of others. And in that particular scripture, he looks at his father and he says, if you can take this cup from me, please take it away. But not my will, thy will. Jesus demonstrates his commitment to the will of the Father and his commitment to the mission for which he was sent to this earth to complete. The first E in leadership is excellence. And the example that we have for excellence comes from John 21 and verse 6. What happens is you've got all these fishermen and they're fishing all day long and they don't catch anything. So Jesus walks up and he's talking to him a little bit and he says, look, cast your nets on the right side. And what happens is when they cast their net, excellence is exceeding common expectation. When they cast their net, they pulled back more fish than they even expected to capture. They brought back so many fish that they couldn't put it in their own boat. They had to have another boat pull up next to them so that they could pull the nets in. Now that is excellence. The A in leadership is for accuracy. Accuracy is being on point in alignment with authority. The scriptural example we're going to use is in John chapter 10, verses 37 through 38, where basically Jesus is questioned by the religious experts at the time. And what he says to him is, look, don't believe me. You don't have to believe me. Believe my works. If you don't believe me, believe my works. And understand that this brings me in alignment. These are the works of my Father. And so what Jesus is demonstrating is that everything that he did was in accordance with the authority of God the Father. The D in leadership stands for diligence. Diligence is the attentive pursuit of a goal or an objective. Now, Jesus was always about evangelizing. He was always about spreading the word, all the way back to when he was 12 years old. We go over to Luke 2 and 49. And what happens is Jesus' parents had come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And after they were done, they were on their way home and they looked back and they're like, where's Jesus? So they had to go all the way back looking for him. And when they found him, he was preaching. He was teaching adults out of the scriptures. And when they confronted him, they were like, hey, man, we were looking for you. And he says, why were you looking for me? Didn't you know I was about my Father's business? He was being diligent to his call, even at 12 years old. The next E in leadership is efficiency. This is obtaining the greatest result at the lowest cost. The example that we have for efficiency comes from Matthew 14 and 19. What happens is Jesus had been preaching and he had been reaching people and the sun started going down. And the disciples came and they told him, they says, hey man, these people got to go shopping. Otherwise they're not going to have any food. And Jesus says, don't send them anywhere. And he was able to take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. And he fed 5,000 people. Now that's efficient. That is the greatest result at the lowest cost. The R in leadership has to do with submitting one to another. Now, Jesus was the Son of God, but he had an understanding and a respect for the laws of the land, for the laws of the empire that were taken over, in particular Caesar. We go to Mark chapter 12 and verse 17, where Jesus tells the people, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. He had a very specific understanding and he was teaching about the respect for the different divisions that we have in this world that we live in. For we are in this world, but not of this world. The S in leadership stands for sacrificial service. Now, there is no greater sacrifice than the sacrifice that Jesus gave to us when he spread out his arms upon that cross, when he was nailed on that cross. And he went through that sacrifice to save us. You see, you got to understand, we were all born in sin. We were all born without salvation. We were all born heading towards death, the grave, and hell and beyond. But it was because of the sacrifice that Jesus Christ gave of his life, facing death toe to toe, that we have salvation. That is sacrificial service. In John chapter 15 and verse 13, Jesus says, greater love has no man than this, that a man would lay down his life for a friend. And Jesus also in Luke 22:34, while he's upon the cross, he says, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Honor, the H in leadership, is immovable respect. We go to John chapter 1 and verse 27, where John the Baptist is speaking of Jesus, and he's speaking of the honor of Jesus who is to come. And he says, he it is who coming after me is preferred before me, whose shoes latcheth I am not worthy to unloose. He understood he wasn't even fit to untie Jesus' shoes because of the position of honor that Jesus stood in. The next letter is the letter I, which is for integrity. Integrity is doing what is known to be right regardless of circumstance. Jesus was challenged because he healed a man. This man came in and it was on the Sabbath day. And the law as God had laid it, said that we weren't supposed to work on the Sabbath day. But the man's hand was crippled and Jesus healed him. And the people looked at him and they were tripping. They were like, man, he's working on the Sabbath. He's doing this miracle on the Sabbath. And so Jesus in Luke chapter 14 and verse 5, he answers them and he says, which of you shall have an ass or an ox fallen into a pit and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? In other words, you're not going to just stop doing stuff. You're going to do what is right, what you know is right. You're not going to leave your cattle stuck in a hole just because it's the Sabbath day. And the same way Jesus was expressing that he was going to do what he knew to be right, which was to bring the healing to that man's hand, even though it was the Sabbath day. And finally, the P in leadership is about proactivity, the courage to take responsibility for an action or a situation. In John 11 and verse 25, Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, should live. Now, Jesus is the example of proactivity from the nature of his birth. You see, God the Father could have left us. And he could have left us wallowing around in our sin, wallowing around in our pity, wallowing around in our demise, but he didn't. He was proactive. He took responsibility. He took authority. He took the courage to send his son in the form of a man down to this earth for the purpose of saving us. That is proactivity. And that closes the book right there on why Jesus is the most excellent example of leadership ever to grace the face of this earth. So as we go into this Christmas season and we continue to close out this year and get ready for 2023, let's make sure that we remember the reason for the season is Jesus. And let's bring in 2023 with Jesus at the top of our minds and have it be, and let's get carried through the entire year to your success at the end of 2023. Thank you very much, and I will see you again soon.